Chapter 12. Leothrin. Caleb forced himself to keep his steady pace through the tall spike weeds and elder trees covering the uneven ground. Morning was long gone, and the sun was climbing higher, marking the beginning of the truly difficult part of his journey. He hadn't slept much, shivering through most of the night, as he had suspected he would, but at first light he doused the dying embers of the fire, threw some cold water on his face and prepared to leave at once. Before he had left, he stretched and ran in a circle amongst the trees for a while, warming himself and getting the blood flowing for his long trek home. When he was done, although he had not slept for more than a few hours, he felt like he had hibernated through a winter. Arming himself with his makeshift knife and stuffing his pockets with some seeds and berries he had gathered, he picked up the woman from her resting place below the tree and laid her over one shoulder. He followed the river as it ran steadily downhill away from the Titans in search for lower ground. He could only guess how far into the mountains they had traveled, but he surmised that as long as he moved downward he would reach the Avondale Plains eventually. On and on he went through the shade of the trees, stopping for only minutes at a time to catch his breath, take a drink from the river and shift the woman to the other shoulder. She was no heavier than an average woman would be, which puzzled him, considering that she had been a gigantic dragon just days before. Ansel would laugh if he knew I was thinking such foolishness. And Layla too. This is all so mad. When I get back she'll be healed, and then we will make her talk. Yes. Perhaps she can tell us something we need to know about the invaders and their plans. She may end up being the key to our retaliation. He snorted at the thought. Or, she may be the key to our destruction. If I bring her into the city and she can be healed after all, what if she attacks again? I'll finish her myself. But no, that won't happen. I'll see to it that this is done properly. Sweat streamed through his dark brown hair and rained down his forehead as he kept his pace solid and unwavering. Just like a drill. He controlled his breathing by counting slowly to 10 as he inhaled, and then again as he exhaled, never losing the pattern. His muscles were still sore, and his feet hurt more than ever now, but otherwise he felt he could hold his current pace for several more hours before stopping to rest properly. The sound of his trot as he rushed by echoed a rhythm foreign to the forest inhabitants, and the woman's black hair waved back and forth to the beat. Hours did pass, and just as he was thinking he would need to stop and take a more devoted rest, he caught the faint scent of smoke. It was then that he noticed the trees stood further apart than before. While still an incline, the ground was in fact steadily leveling out, and the terrain seemed much less rocky. I'm getting close. He skipped the break and kept on with renewed enthusiasm as the stream tapered off in the ditch beside him. Stuffing the last of the berries from his pockets into his mouth, he doubled his speed, heading lower still and following the smell as best he could. It seemed he was home already, and he hoped to see the edge of the mountain forest within half an hour. Nevertheless, it took triple that time until he finally emerged from the trees into the bright light of midday. He stood at the top of a mile of rigid rocks at the base of the Titan Mountains. As the cool wind from the trees behind blew a refreshing breath through his hair, he rested the woman beside him, and let his eyes drop down and follow the zigzagging trail through the stone, steadily transforming into grass as it went. His eyes continued on to the wide expanse of the Avondale prairies, green as far as the eye could see, with clumps of thick forest dotting the way south alongside the great sparkling river Lees in the distance. In stark contrast he looked east next to the black streams of smoke that rose from the white stone walls of Tritus. All was quiet and peaceful from where he stood, but his stomach turned as he imagined the devastation held behind the walls. Caleb could almost feel his blood start to simmer as he looked at his home in such a state. Luckily, none of the other small townships he could make out from where he was showed signs of attack. Fate assail you, Queen Tamara. The sun was hanging low behind him, casting long shadows on fields of reddish gold when he finally approached the western gate of the city. Since his break atop the rocks at the feet of the mountains, it seemed as if his burden had doubled in weight, and his feet ached as if he had been traveling for weeks. A quick mental analysis reminded him he had hardly eaten in days, and had not had a drink since the beginning of the third quarter day. The dirt road became paved stone some 100 spans from the city wall and was lined with elevated trees, but before he could approach, 4 horsemen carrying crossbows came storming toward him, yelling commands to stop his advance. He looked past them to see the gates were closed and more archers atop the wall stood at the ready. He wished he had given more thought beforehand as to what to say about the woman on his shoulder. No time for that now. If these men have heard that it was I who slew King Rawlin and brought ruin to Grimhall, they will see this disaster as a partial fault of mine and run me through anyway. Hail! Caleb called, raising his hand. His voice croaked out of a parched throat. It is I, Captain Caleb Rembrandt of His Highness Royal Army. The horsemen looked grim in the late afternoon light, but as they drew close enough their bow arms dropped and they slowed their animals to a trot. The one in front signaled for the other three to stay where they were, while he dismounted and ran to him. Sir Caleb, fate has kept you well. The whole city saw the beast take flight with you atop its back. But you have returned again, he exclaimed, tapping his forehead twice. He went to clap him on the shoulder but stopped short, noticing that the bundle Caleb was carrying had a pair of bare feet protruding through the bottom. This woman was unfortunate enough to have been on the dragon also when it took flight, I'm afraid, Caleb said quickly. She needs to see a warden as soon as possible. He laughed inside at his pitiful lie, but hoped that these men would believe every word he said no matter how foolish it sounded. The bowman furrowed his brow in confusion. She was on the dragon also? How could she? He shook his head quickly, dismissing the matter. That is not important now. You are safe and need attending to as well, sir. He whipped around and pointed to one of the other mounted men. Quick! Send word to the castle that Captain Rembrandt has returned and bring a warden. The other man nodded and began to turn his horse away, but Caleb stopped him. No. Thank you, trooper, but I would like to go there myself. But sir, you must be weary and this woman needs help, no? We have been ordered to bring you safely in if you were found. I understand, Caleb responded. Consider your task complete. I will go to the castle alone and report your excellent service. If you could just spare one of your animals, I would be grateful. The bowman's knit brow deepened, and he shook his head again at a loss. Of course, of course. He signaled a rider to dismount, and Caleb strode over to it, eager to load the girl onto its back and off of his poor shoulders. He had a newfound pity for the horse, as he laid her on top over the front of the saddle. By the look of things, Tritus claims the victory, Caleb said as he took the reins from the previous rider and hoisted himself up by the stirrup. But tell me, trooper, does King Hallis live? The bowman dug out a water pouch and tossed it to him. Caleb drank savagely as he listened to the answer. The king lives, sir, though he has been badly wounded. Talgarth sages destroyed the royal courts, and a unit of men followed them shortly afterwards. Tritus claims the victory, but I would hardly call it that. Half the city is burned and many fires remain unquenched. The smell of our dead and the rotting gruel hide will cling to the air for months. Everyone has reason to mourn, and they all fear a second attack is imminent. At the comment, Caleb's mind turned to Layla. And to his father next. He tossed the water pouch back empty and nodded. Excellent work. I ride now to see that this woman doesn't die. If you would, please escort me through the gates and resume your watch. As the five of them rode on, the bowman hollered up a command to the men on the tower as they approached, and in moments the gates slid open, revealing the familiar streets of the West District. Caleb felt a surge of relief, a wholeness re-enter him as he passed under the stone archway of the entrance to the city. But his feelings were soon dampened by the heavy gloom that weighed down the air like a wet rag thrown over the city. The buildings in this district were smaller, home to many of the farmers whose plantations were outside the city walls, and merchants whose businesses were not so thriving. The area was not poor, just quaint and quieter than the rest of the city. Caleb dismissed the men to remain at their posts, and assured them again that he would go to the castle soon. His borrowed animal trotted slowly down the middle of the street, with its head hanging low, most likely attempting to escape the stench of smoke and blood in the air, but it looked as though it were depressed itself. The West District had suffered a heavy blow. Only a few of the larger buildings had been set to flame, but nearly all of the structures had taken other damage. As Caleb made his way through the narrow winding path, he noticed so many shattered windows and broken doors that he could not count them, and he could hear voices somewhere over the rooftops, some distant of men shouting and working, others closer of children crying. He almost wanted to weep himself. A few men and women passed by him, carrying wood or dragging carts behind them, but he may as well have been invisible, as he received no more than a quick glance at best. It was a scene Caleb had seen several times before, the look of a people who had just been thrown to the ground and had not the heart to get back up. He had seen it before, but in other places. Not here. He slowly made his way through the West District, weaving in and out of the twisting streets, sometimes having to backtrack and reroute when he ran into dead ends of gathered rubble or a pyre of burning gruel bodies blocked off by soldiers. The scenery remained much the same for a while, but as he headed east toward his own home, he came across patches of untouched homes and buildings. No one said a word to him the entire way back to his father's home, at the far wall of the stone circular court. He was relieved to see that most of the homes there had been passed by, with the exception of a few more broken doors. He stopped abruptly when he noticed flowers around the door of the tavern brewer, whom he and his father had seen briefly as the attack commenced. A shattered sword rested at the base of the flowers, and the door stood broken and skewed in the doorway. He did not look past the threshold to the scene he knew lay just beyond. He shook his head and moved on. The fountain at the center of the court was broken on top and had a few gruel bodies lying in it, one filled with 5 arrows. Caleb drew his horse to a stop in front of his home. He pulled the woman from off the top and rested her on his shoulder again, grimacing in exhaustion, and after sending the horse away with a slap on the rump, opened the door. It was dark inside, with only the faint light of the fading sun squinting through the small windows. If anything had been spoiled in his home, he could not tell. All looked normal, and he sighed with relief. "Father," he called. Nothing. He glanced into the kitchen and the study down the hall, and was met with only emptiness. The hook that usually held his father's hat stood empty by the door. He got a fire started in the study, and rested the woman beside it, on proper blankets and a feather pillow. He lit a few candles in the house, and went upstairs to find better provisions for the woman. After the day in the mountains, he felt he was in a utopia of supplies. He took a few minutes to find bandages for her eye to replace his torn sleeve that was now dark and damp with blood, and hung a bucket of water from the well outside above the fire to boil. He pulled an old wooden box from beneath his father's bed that he had rarely seen. It was one of his father's most valuable treasures. He unfastened the latch on the dusty trunk and opened it up to find a nest of neatly folded clothing, dresses and tunics once worn by his mother. Since he had never known his mother, the clothing meant little to him, but as he held them they felt important and precious, as he remembered the way his father had always handled them the few times he had seen him do so, cradling them with such reverence and care, as if he still held her in his arms. As he fingered the fabric, he wondered about the truth of his mother. The confusion and mixed accounts concerning her life led him to feel that he couldn't trust anything anymore, least of all what his father said about her passing while giving birth to him. Caleb asked about the discrepancies on several occasions, and Damon always insisted he was being foolish. But Caleb knew. The fact that he would not share the truth of her death with his own son made him resent and respect his father's legend all at the same time. Conflicting emotions started to well up inside of him, so he grabbed a long tunic on top and shut the case again. It's just clothing, and there is nothing else in the house she could wear. She will need them if she is going to survive. It's a miracle my cloak has kept her as well as it has. He returned the box under the bed, and went back down the stairs with the tunic he had retrieved along with some of his own knitted stockings for her feet. As he reached her side by the fire and removed the water from its hook above the flames, he puzzled over completing his next task. He knew she needed to be in clean, warm clothing as soon as possible. He untied the tight knot in the cloak and removed it hastily, spending some awkward minutes getting the tunic over her head and properly covering her. All the while, he wondered what he would say if Layla were to walk through the door at that moment. He quickened his pace, and his eyes widened in wonder as he observed that the scars, cuts and bruises on her body had nearly vanished, and the color of her skin was more vibrant than it had been the previous day. Do shifters have the ability to heal like this? After she had been clothed and wrapped again in a thick blanket, he set to work changing the bandage covering her eye. He removed the old sleeves and tossed them aside, revealing a lump of red, blue and purple surrounded by a crust of dark blood. She had not healed so well here, besides the fact that it had not yet taken her life. He cleaned it well now with hot water and herbs from the pantry, and rebandaged her head carefully before setting her down to the pillow again. He turned his back for a moment to retrieve the pitcher of water, and when he turned back to try and get her to drink, her uncovered eye was open and staring directly into his. Caleb nearly dropped the pitcher in shock but recovered quickly. Her expression had not changed a bit but for her eye staring up at him, half open and weary. Her eye was large and beautiful, glowing with a soft yellow color in the darkening house, and it seemed to be pulling Caleb into it as he stared, not sure what to do. Her body had not moved either, and she looked so stoic that Caleb was still not sure she was conscious until a tired whisper trembled from her mouth. "You." "Me." "Me what?" Caleb was not sure what to say even after his shock had waned a little. She spoke again before he could respond, as if she were not speaking to him at all. "It is gone. I can feel my mind. I am free." "Is she mad? What is she talking about?" The woman tried to sit up, but her head rose no more than 2 inches from the pillow before it fell back down, and she sighed in what sounded like a mixture of relief and pain. She looked at him again with a totally unreadable face. "Drink this," he said, offering her the water. "Drink as much as you can." He put the pitcher to her mouth and nodded as she drank half of it down in seconds, then coughed from taking in too much too quickly. "Just rest now," Caleb said, still in awe that she was awake even before a healing hex. "Help will come soon and you will recover." Her eye closed again, and she answered so quietly that Caleb had to lean closer to hear. "You brought me here?" "Yes. My name is Caleb. I am a friend." Why did I say that? She may still be hostile. I need to get Ansel down here quickly. "Caleb," she muttered. "I am Leothrin. Thank you for freeing me." "Of course," Caleb answered, feigning to know what she was talking about. "Freeing her? What does that mean?" Her last words had trailed off and she was again in a deep sleep. The day's events kept getting stranger and stranger, and in his tired mind he felt like he was stumbling in and out of a dream himself. He pulled the blankets tighter around her, and could not help but watch her face for a moment. She looked the same, but somehow he could see that a degree of her pain had been replaced by a strange aura of peace. While she rested, he retrieved more water from the well, and after changing into new clothes himself sat down in the kitchen to eat anything he could find. He could hardly keep his eyes open as he wolfed down 2 apples, and a half loaf of wrapped bread with cheese and nuts. He felt ready to collapse right onto the table, and very well would have if not for the invigorating sustenance. After his meal, he stumbled upstairs to his old room and brought the sheets down to the study, blowing out the candles as he went. He added more logs to the fire, and bundled into his father's creaky high-backed chair in the corner where he could see the woman if something were to happen. He yawned. "Don't want her to up and leave during the night, before we can get some answers out of her. I can keep a good eye on her from here." She did not leave during the night, and if she had, Caleb would not have known. His eyes were closed for only a moment before his chin dropped to his chest and he was dreaming.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.